When my stepkids said I wasn't their real dad, I decided to prove them right. It didn't take long for them to regret it. Before that night, I used to believe families were built through the little things, the routines nobody else notices. The early mornings when I'd wake up before everyone else just to make sure the house felt calm before the day started. The sound of cereal pouring into bowls while sleepy voices argued about who took the last clean spoon. The rushed mornings where someone always forgot their homework or couldn't find their shoes. I wasn't their biological father. Everyone knew that. But for years, I had still been the one tying loose shoelaces, helping with science projects, and standing on the sidelines of school games, clapping a little louder than anyone else. Those things never felt like obligations. They felt natural. Like they were exactly where I was supposed to be. The kids had grown used to it too. They'd call for me from across the house whenever something broke or when they needed help with something their mom didn't understand. Sometimes it was homework. Sometimes it was a bike chain that slipped off. Sometimes it was just someone to sit beside them when they had a bad day. And every time I showed up. Not because anyone forced me to. But because somewhere along the way, I had started to think of them as mine. That's why the moment it all changed felt so unreal. It happened on an ordinary evening. Nothing dramatic at first, just the usual chaos of dinner time. The television was humming softly in the background, and the kitchen smelled like the pasta their mom had just finished cooking. The kids were arguing about something small. I don't even remember what it was now. Probably chores, or who forgot to take the trash out. I stepped in the way I always did, calm, trying to settle things before they turned into a bigger fight. "Hey," I said gently, leaning against the counter. "Let's relax a little. It's not that serious." Usually that would have been enough. But that night, the oldest one was already frustrated. I could see it in the tightness of their voice, the way their shoulders were tense. They turned toward me suddenly. And then the words came out. "You can't tell us what to do, you're not even our real dad." The sentence hung in the air like something fragile that had just shattered. For a moment, nobody moved. The room went strangely quiet. Even the television seemed softer somehow. I remember noticing small things in that silence, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint clatter of dishes in the sink where their mom had stopped washing halfway through. She was standing in the kitchen doorway now, completely still. The younger one stared down at the table, suddenly very interested in the pattern on the wood. No one laughed it off. No one said it was a joke. And the strange thing was, I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't remind them of the years I had spent showing up for them. Instead, I just stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Because deep down, I knew something important had just shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But in a quiet, permanent way that none of us fully understood yet. That night, something inside me stopped trying so hard to be their dad. The next morning felt almost normal. Sunlight crept through the kitchen window the same way it always did, casting pale stripes across the counter. The coffee machine hummed softly, filling the room with that familiar bitter smell that usually helped me wake up. From the hallway, I could hear the kids moving around, doors opening, footsteps rushing back and forth, someone complaining that they couldn't find their backpack. It was the same routine we had lived for years. But something inside me had changed. I stood there holding my coffee mug, listening to the chaos I usually stepped into without thinking. Normally, this was the moment I would start helping. I'd remind someone about their homework, grab a missing lunchbox, or untangle the morning arguments that always seemed to happen right before school. That day, I didn't. I just leaned quietly against the counter and took another sip of coffee. A few minutes later, the youngest walked into the kitchen, looking slightly panicked. "Have you seen my math folder?" they asked. The question came out automatically, like it always had. For a second, our eyes met. And I realized something. They were still expecting me to know. I used to keep track of things like that, which assignments were due, which books needed to go back into backpacks, which small problems could ruin an entire school day if they weren't fixed quickly. But this time I simply shook my head. "I'm not sure," I said calmly. They stared at me for a moment, clearly surprised. Then they nodded slowly and walked away to search somewhere else. It was such a small moment. Barely noticeable. But it was the first time I had stepped back. Over the next few days, I kept doing the same thing. I didn't start arguments. I didn't ignore anyone. I was still polite. Still calm. Still part of the house. But I stopped filling the invisible role I had built for myself. When the trash piled up, I didn't remind anyone. When someone struggled with homework late at night, I stayed in the living room instead of walking over to help. When rides were needed or problems popped up, I let their mother handle them. And the strange thing was, nobody noticed right away. At least not consciously. But slowly, the rhythm of the house began to change. Small things started slipping through the cracks. School papers were forgotten on the kitchen table. Morning routines took longer because nobody was quietly keeping things organized behind the scenes. The kids began asking their mom questions they used to ask me. At first, she seemed confused by the shift too. I noticed her watching me sometimes from across the room, like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't stepping in the way I normally did. But she didn't say anything. And neither did I. The truth was, I still cared about them deeply. That hadn't changed at all. In fact, sometimes it was harder now. Because every time I saw them struggling with something small, my instinct was to jump in and help like I always had. But then I'd remember those words again. "You're not our real dad." So I kept my distance. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because for the first time I was simply respecting the role they had said I didn't have. At first, the house didn't seem very different. From the outside, everything probably looked the same morning rush, the same noise of backpacks dropping by the front door, the same television humming in the evenings while everyone moved around the living room. But when you live somewhere long enough, you start to notice the small things. And the small things were starting to change. Before all this, I had quietly filled the gaps nobody else paid attention to. If someone forgot to sign a permission slip, I'd catch it before it became a problem. If a ride was needed after school, I'd usually be the one already waiting outside before they even asked. It wasn't something anyone had assigned me to do. It had just happened naturally over time. But now that I had stepped back, those little safety nets were gone. One afternoon, the youngest came home frustrated because they had forgotten a project that was due that day. Normally, I would have reminded them the night before, maybe even helped them double-check their backpack before school. This time, no one had. They tossed their bag onto the couch and disappeared into their room without saying much. Later that evening, I sat in the living room while the sound of their quiet sniffles drifted down the hallway. My instinct was immediate. My body almost moved before my mind could stop it. I wanted to knock on the door, sit beside them, and help figure out how to fix the problem, the way I always had before. But I stayed where I was. The truth was, it hurt more than I expected. Not helping them felt unnatural, like ignoring a part of myself that had grown used to being there for them. Still, I reminded myself of what they had said. So I stayed silent. The changes kept piling up in small, subtle ways. The older one began asking their mom questions about school forms and schedules that they used to bring to me. Sometimes she knew the answers. Sometimes she didn't. Dinner conversations felt a little shorter too. Not hostile. Just different. Like everyone could sense that something in the room had shifted, even if nobody was brave enough to talk about it yet. The moment that really stayed with me happened a few days later. It was late in the evening, and the house was quiet except for the scratching sound of pencils against paper. The youngest was sitting at the dining table, staring down at a math worksheet. I could see the frustration building in their face. They erased the same answer 3 times, each attempt looking more discouraged than the last. For years, math homework had been our thing. They would sit beside me while I explained each problem slowly, and by the end of the night, we'd usually both be laughing about how complicated something simple could feel at first. That night, they glanced toward the living room where I was sitting. Our eyes met for a second. For a moment, it looked like they were about to ask for help. But then something stopped them. Maybe they remembered the argument. Maybe they remembered what they had said. Instead, they looked back down at the worksheet and kept struggling through it alone. That moment hurt more than the words ever had. Because for the first time, the distance between us wasn't just something I had created. They felt it too. If anyone noticed the change faster than the kids did, it was her. She had always been the quiet observer in the house, the one who noticed things people didn't say out loud. The one who could read a mood just by the way someone walked into a room. At first, she didn't mention anything. But I could tell she was paying attention. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me from across the kitchen while she dried dishes. Other times, she'd glance up from her phone in the living room when one of the kids asked her something they normally would have asked me. It wasn't suspicion in her eyes. It was confusion. Like she was trying to understand a shift she couldn't quite explain yet. A few nights later, the house finally fell quiet. The kids had gone to their rooms, and the television murmured softly in the background while the glow from the lamp filled the living room with warm light. I was sitting on one end of the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through channels. She came in a few minutes later and sat beside me. Not too close. But closer than usual. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't tense, just thoughtful. Finally, she sighed softly. "You've been different lately," she said. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was careful. I kept my eyes on the television for a moment before answering. "Have I?" She gave a small, almost tired smile. "You know you have." Another quiet pause settled over the room. Then she turned slightly toward me. "They're kids," she said gently. "They say things when they're angry. They don't always understand what they're saying." I knew what she was talking about. Of course I did. But hearing it out loud made the memory return with uncomfortable clarity. The sharpness in the kid's voice. The silence that followed. "You're not even our real dad." I leaned back into the couch, folding my arms loosely. "I know they're kids," I said calmly. She studied my face, like she was trying to measure how much those words had actually affected me. "What they said, they didn't mean it the way it sounded," she continued. Maybe that was true. But sometimes words still reveal things people didn't realize they were holding inside. After a moment, I turned toward her. "You know something I've been thinking about," I said quietly. She waited. "Being a father isn't just about biology." The words came out slower than I expected, like I had been carrying them around in my head for days. "It's about showing up. Every day. For years." I rubbed my hands together slowly, choosing the next part carefully. "But if they don't see me that way, if they don't want me in that role, I'm not going to force it." Her expression softened, but there was worry in her eyes now. "They didn't say they don't want you," she replied. "Maybe not directly," I said. "But they reminded me what I am." And the truth was simple. I wasn't their biological father. Everything I had done for them had been a choice. A choice I made because I loved them. But love doesn't mean you get to decide how someone sees you. For a long moment, she didn't respond. The television flickered quietly in the background while we both sat there, caught somewhere between understanding and uncertainty. Finally, she reached out and rested her hand gently on my arm. The touch was warm. Familiar. But even then, neither of us knew how to fix what had already started to break. For a while, nothing dramatic happened. There were no big arguments. No emotional confrontations. Just quiet changes. The kind that slowly shift the feeling of a home without anyone fully realizing when it started. The kids were still busy with school, friends, and the usual distractions of growing up. Life kept moving forward the way it always does. But the difference was becoming harder to ignore. The house used to run on an invisible rhythm. Small problems were solved before they had time to grow, and someone was always quietly keeping track of the little details that made everything work smoothly. Now those details were slipping. One morning, the oldest rushed through the house looking for a permission slip that needed to be signed before school. Papers were scattered across the kitchen table, backpacks were dumped on the floor, and frustration filled the room. In the past, they would have brought it straight to me. I used to keep track of those things, reminding them the night before so they wouldn't panic at the last minute. This time, I simply sat at the counter, drinking my coffee. Their mother tried to help, flipping through the papers with growing impatience. Eventually, they found the form buried inside a notebook. But by the time it was signed, they were already late. The frustration lingered the entire morning. Moments like that started happening more often. Missed reminders. Forgotten plans. Small problems stacking up where there used to be quiet solutions. But the moment that truly changed everything came a few weeks later. It was a school event, the kind I had always attended without question. A small award ceremony. Nothing huge, but important enough that the kids would always glance toward the crowd to see who showed up. In the past, I had never missed one. I'd sit in those uncomfortable folding chairs with the other parents, clapping loudly whenever their names were called. Sometimes I'd even embarrass them a little by cheering too much. But this time, I stayed home. I didn't make a scene about it. I simply didn't go. That evening, the kids returned from the event with their mom. I could hear their voices in the hallway as they walked inside, the sound of their shoes tapping against the floor. The excitement in their voices faded slightly when they noticed me sitting in the living room. The youngest looked confused. "You didn't come?" they asked. Their mother answered before I could. "He thought you didn't want him there." The room went quiet again. Not the tense silence from before, this one felt heavier, slower. The kids exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time, it looked like something had finally clicked. They were starting to realize that my absence wasn't random. It was connected to what had been said that night weeks earlier. The oldest shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of their neck. "But, we didn't mean," they stopped mid-sentence. Because suddenly the weight of those words was clearer than it had been in the moment they were spoken. And for the first time since that argument, I saw something new in their expressions. Not anger. Not frustration. Regret. The house felt quieter than usual that evening. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the thoughtful kind. The kind where everyone seems to be thinking about the same thing but nobody is quite sure who should speak first. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, pretending to focus on something that wasn't really holding my attention. The soft ticking of the wall clock filled the room while the faint sound of dishes clinked in the kitchen where their mom was finishing up. Then I heard footsteps. More than one. When I looked up, the kids were standing in the doorway. All of them. That alone told me something was different. Normally they came into the room one at a time, usually to ask for something or to grab a snack. But this time they stood together, shifting their weight nervously like they had rehearsed the moment on the way over. The oldest cleared their throat first. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair. "Sure," I said. They pulled out chairs and sat across from me at the table. The youngest kept fidgeting with the sleeve of their sweater, twisting the fabric around their fingers. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, the oldest took a deep breath. "About what we said before, that night." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Their eyes stayed on the table while they talked. "We were mad," they continued. "And we didn't really think about what we were saying." The younger one nodded quickly beside them. "It just came out." The words sounded small now, nothing like the sharp anger that had filled the room weeks earlier. Another pause settled between us. Then the youngest spoke quietly. "You stopped helping us." There wasn't any accusation in their voice, just an observation. I folded my hands together on the table. You said I wasn't your dad, I replied gently. So I figured, maybe you didn't want me acting like one. Hearing it said out loud made the air feel heavier. The oldest looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. That's not what we meant. Their voice wavered slightly. I mean, yeah, you're not our biological dad. The honesty in the sentence made the moment even more fragile. But you're still the one who's always been there, they continued. You're the one who taught me how to ride a bike. You're the one who stayed up helping me study when I thought I was going to fail math. The younger one nodded again. And you're the one who checks under the bed when I think there's something there. A small smile tugged at my lips despite everything. The room grew quiet again, but this time it felt softer. The oldest took another breath before finishing what they had started. We didn't realize what it would feel like if you stopped. The youngest reached across the table slowly, resting their hand near mine. We're sorry. Those two words hung in the air for a moment. And for the first time since that night, I could see the sincerity in their faces, the nervous hope that maybe things weren't too broken to fix. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at them. The same kids I had spent years showing up for. The same kids who had hurt me without realizing how deeply. And now, the same kids trying to make it right. For a moment after their apology, no one moved. The dining table that had seen so many ordinary moments, rushed breakfasts, messy homework sessions, late-night snacks, suddenly felt like the center of something much bigger. The youngest's hand was still resting near mine on the table. Not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. I looked at their faces one by one. The nervous hope in their eyes reminded me of all the years before this, scraped knees, bedtime stories, the way they used to run toward me after school just to tell me something small that had happened during the day. Back then, none of us had ever questioned what role I played in their lives. But growing up changes things. Kids start testing boundaries. Words come out sharper than they mean them to. Still, some words leave marks. I exhaled slowly and leaned forward a little, resting my forearms on the table. You know, I said quietly, when you said that, it hurt more than you probably realized. None of them interrupted. The oldest lowered their eyes again, clearly bracing for whatever came next. I've always known I wasn't your biological father, I continued. That was never a secret. I paused for a moment, choosing the next words carefully. But being a dad was never about biology for me. I glanced toward the hallway where so many memories lived, the doorframes where we had marked their height as they grew, the spot near the stairs where bikes used to lean after long afternoons outside. It was about showing up, I said. Every school event. Every late-night homework meltdown. Every time someone thought there was a monster under the bed. The youngest gave a tiny, embarrassed smile at that. I chose to be there, I said softly. Every single time. Silence settled over the table again, but it felt different now, less heavy, more reflective. The oldest finally looked back up at me. You still are our dad, they said quietly. The words were simple. But they carried something genuine this time, not anger, not frustration, just honesty. Before I could respond, the youngest suddenly pushed their chair back and walked around the table. Then they wrapped their arms around me in a tight hug. It happened so quickly I barely had time to react. Their small arms squeezed around my shoulders like they were afraid I might disappear if they didn't hold on hard enough. Instinctively, I hugged them back. A moment later, the others joined too. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment. No big speeches, no perfect ending music playing somewhere in the background. Just a quiet group hug in the middle of the dining room. But somehow, it felt more real than anything else. Standing there with them, I realized something important. Families aren't defined by blood. They're defined by the people who keep choosing each other, even after things fall apart. And that night, for the first time in weeks, it finally felt like we were choosing each other again.